working in. And but without any more delay, let's get into the presentation. And I'd like to introduce Bill Murphy. Bill is a longtime member of our chapter. He was trained back, we were just talking about this, in 2017 in Denver. He's also very active in elders and climate action. And I think a lot of the information that's coming to us tonight from Bill is because of his active participation in the Climate Action California group. Bill will be talking about landfill methane and, like as I said, also wastewater plants. And then we also have David Benzonson, and he is actually has a very interesting background as well. He now currently is working with the Physicians for Social Responsibility and Climate Action California, as is Bill. And he is really very interested in the oil and gas industry portion of the methane issues, which as I am as well. So I think we're going to have a lot of great information to avail ourselves of for either future actions or just to simply understand the methane issue a little more deeply. So with that, Bill and David, I'll let you have stage.
Well, thank you, Karen. Let's see. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Let me do two things simultaneously. Before I share my screen, which is going to be the presentation, I'm also going to put the link to it in the chat. So the idea with this is that you can use this as a reference material for a long time to come. So if it turns out that landfill methane is something that you're interested in, we have Climate Action California is not really a functional silo in the sense of it being an ordinary organization. It's just a coalition of coalitions. So I'm in 3 different organizations, that sort of thing. And I noticed Manuel Espinoza is here. He's on their climate finance team. That's a coalition of coalitions. David's with the energy sector, including methane from oil and gas. That's people from all different backgrounds. And so landfill methane is kind of the same way. And so the good news about that is that we have the ability to sort of pull ourselves together, and sometimes you wind up rubbing shoulders with some people that are higher level than I have any business rubbing shoulders with. And so we have a landfill methane team that's one of 4 in the super pollutant space. There's also hydrofluorocarbons, which is refrigeration chemicals that are 3,300 times as powerful as methane. There's an ag methane team, and then David's got methane from the oil and gas sector. And so what we found is that we were a horizontal organization when we were 350 Silicon Valley, but we've tried to have campaign teams that do a deep dive with the durability of your volunteerism for several years, so that after a couple of years, you're actually an expert. Not only do you know what's going on, but you know how to affect things, you know what the knobs are to turn and stuff. So that's how we come at this. Is about a year ago, I started becoming interested, as many of us did, in the idea that super pollutants had an unusual capability. Here, let me share my screen. See if that's going to work. Super pollutants have an unusual ability. Here we go. To do something that's kind of rare in the world of pollutants, and that is that you can get relatively fast results because they disappear from the atmosphere quickly. Now, the downside is that with methane, for example, over 20 years or so, it causes about, let's see, this is going to be my PowerPoint deck, which is column B. Try to ignore columns, the blue columns E and F. That's for you to have as a reference material for later. It's what you can do on some of these line items. And the green stuff off on the right side, that's a links library. That's more brain candy for you if you want to do an even deeper dive. And so this could keep you busy for like a whole 5-day weekend or something like that. But what we found is that there's a strategic advantage to working on the super pollutants because, yeah, sure, not only are they hydrofluorocarbons are over 3,000 times as powerful as CO2, causing global warming. Methane over 20 years is 84 times as powerful, but over 100 years, it's only about 21 times as powerful. But it's also that since they're gone quickly, we get a strategic advantage, and it's rare to have the ability to get stuff done quick in climate change. So let me kind of go through these syllogisms. Over 20 years, you can see that it's a super pollutant. It accounts for about 30% of warming to date. It's also likely that methane will account for about 30% of warming going forward. So it's a vital knob that we must turn. But here's the punchline, this row 5. Can everybody see this, or do you need it to be bigger?
If you could make it a little bigger, that would be awesome.
How's that?
That's better, thank you.
Okay, cool. And so, so here it turns out that because its half-life is only 8 years, any reduction you get to methane reduces the greenhouse effect surprisingly quickly. This is contrasts with a half-life of 53 years for CO2, where greenhouse winds, for example, from the clean transportation space, clean energy space, and so forth, take effect much more slowly. So you get both, like that title of that John Doerr book that was published recently, Speed and Scope, or Scope and Speed, something like that. So methane reductions, as well as refrigeration chemicals and black carbon, the super pollutants or the short-lived climate pollutants, they act quickly to buy us time to work on slower acting CO2 strategies. And I'm not suggesting that we don't work on the clean transportation sector, the clean energy sector, regardless of the speed of efficacy, because we've got to work on that stuff, because these are very, very big knobs, got to turn them. And in particular, that stuff is cumulative. So you can't ignore that. That'll be cumulative for 250 years at least. But we have a rare advantage. So the thesis statement for tonight is that landfills are a more effective arena for advocacy than most folks think, offering both rare speed as well as the scope that we all see. Plus, as you'll see in a moment, rare precision given the relatively small number of super emitting landfills. And so I'm going to take us on, being a numbers head, I'm going to take you on 2 sort of side trips to the numbers in our state. So the first thing was scope. This is the California Air Resources Board's inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. It hasn't been updated lately, but it will be. And you can see methane. This page is called Short-Lived Climate Pollutants Inventory. It's linked, for those of you that opened it on your own computer, in this block. You can see that the big kahuna is, it's actually agriculture, dairy manure, 25% plus dairy, enteric 20%, and non-livestock, which is cattle and fields, is 10%. That's 55% of the methane. So agricultural methane is the big kahuna in this state. Landfills plus wastewater is about 24%, so that would be in second place. And then David's going to talk about oil and gas extraction, 4% plus pipelines is 9%. Well, that 13% is probably low by a factor of 2. And David will, you might confirm this, but I think that orphaned and abandoned wells are not counted because it can't measure them. And there's over 20,000 in this state. So that number is subject to revision. Probably the wastewater methane number is low by a factor of 2 as well, because they're just now waking up to the fact that all these wastewater plants that they put into service in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they're kind of leaky, which luckily you can fix with a wrench. But we'll talk about that in a bit. So in terms of scope, landfills is about 8% of our carbon footprint in this state. So that's row 9. That's, we get the scope, right? But we have this, we talked about the speed, but here's this other advantage that we have strategically. It turns out you can apply the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, to the data that's been measured with the airborne surveys. And a wow jumps out at us, which is that you see in that column that's yellow with the ones that are orange. So these are landfills, and these are the measurements that they had with an overflight series in 2016 and 2017, and then a revision in 2021 and 2022. Turns out that if you just look at, let's see where we are here. The top 6 landfills, you get 51% of your potential entitlement, or your potential wins. That's really cool to discover. If you look at the, say, row 17 minus 4 header rows, if you look at the top 13 landfills, you get 81% of all potential wins. Now, we're not going to get this because landfills have an open face at the front end where they have to open up the cover every day, put new stuff in, close it up every night. So that's always going to be a problem. So we're not going to win 81% or 51%. But this gives us a really unique advantage to where we can probably focus on fewer targets, which is the opposite of you're trying to say flip the transportation sector, where you have to have hundreds of thousands, probably millions of families make a decision to do what you want them to do. Similar in the building decarbonization sector, you have to have hundreds of thousands of families decide to do a retrofit. So here, and this is true in other states as well, we might be able to get away with using this for a strategy thing. We also have, let me do this up a little bit. And don't forget, there's stuff over on the right that's got cool links and what you can do is, but I'll leave you guys to browse that on your own because it would distract from talking. The other thing is we have three really good tailwinds that working in our favor right now in the landfill methane sector. There's 2 carbon mapper satellites about to go up either late this year or in early 2024. So there's a remote technological sensing capability is increasing right now in this decade, and it gives us a real opportunity to spot at least very big plumes from space. State it's run for about 100, I think something like $100 million for one of them, or for them, and then I think Michael Bloom kicked in a similar dollar amount. So those satellites are going to be invaluable, not just in the landfill sector, but also in the oil and gas sector in California and spotting methane plumes in agriculture. It's a little more difficult in agriculture because they tend not to be point sources. They tend to be area sources where it's spread out, which is where things like cheap sensing drones, which fly low to the ground, can also then supplement that with more remote sensing ability. For example, a landfill, you patrol it all the time, at least once a month on foot today with a handheld sensor to look for leaks. Well, if you did this with drones flying 6 feet above the ground on a grid, you could have them do it every week. And you'll see that there's a landfill methane regulation update coming to the 2010 that's underway right now that may require something like that. Second big tailwind is that, as I mentioned, we've got this California Air Resources landfill methane regulation update is in progress as we speak. And the third one is that Senate Bill 1383's 2025 deadline is fast approaching. And that's for the diversion away from landfills of, this is hard, 75% of all organic material, including food waste by 2025, and divert it to beneficial uses like compost, mulch, biogas, that sort of thing. And recover 20% of the edible food waste. We'll talk a lot about that towards the end of this part of my presentation. A real quick one, what's a landfill? In the past, a landfill has just been what it is right now today in a lot of the developing countries. It's just a big stack where everything's thrown into the landfill. And it leaks methane now and it leaks methane long after closure. But the state of the art in the United States, not applying necessarily to all the rural counties of poorer states, is what you'd probably call scientific management today. And essentially it's a sorting system where you have, like, think of the Sunnyvale Smart Center. So everything that can be plucked out and then set aside for some beneficial use does get separated. And like, for example, steel cans, dry cardboard, and green waste that gets sent over there because of the 3-bin system. And only what's left over gets thrown into landfill. Our landfill, I think, is Newbie Island in South Fremont. For example, the green waste gets sent to a composting facility that's right near 880 and 101 in that part of San Jose. So along with that, it's not too bad methane capture systems. Inside there's piping systems and a blower that keeps positive pressure so that it can be, methane is constantly being created as anaerobic decomposition occurs for decades. It's almost like a balloon blowing up. And if you pump the stuff out, like for example, Sunnyvale has 2 turbines where they just burn the stuff and they use it to generate electricity that they then use to power their municipal wastewater digesters and then the blowers themselves. So leaks still happen, and that's part of the purview of the part of this conversation today. It's time to find out how to do a better job of covering breakdowns, equipment failures, and stuff like that. So tonight's punchline, sorry, long preamble, short punchline, essentially is that the campaigns are twofold now in California. And the first one is to update the 2010 landfill methane regulation. That'll tighten up leak detection. It'll tighten up remediation protocols. and enforcement. And it may focus on the biggest emitters using that Pareto's rule. Wow. Now, the second part of our camp that can probably be accomplished by a relatively small number of activists. I'll talk about that in a moment. And I think it is being accomplished. I'm optimistic about it. I'm not as optimistic about the Senate Bill 1383 rollout because it's really big and it's really difficult. But what it will do is if we're successful at diverting 75% of green waste from the landfills to another beneficial use and 20% recovery of edible food waste, it'll gradually but dramatically decrease the business model for landfills in the future decades. In other words, it'll increase the methane that's capable of being produced because you'll just have less organic material going into it. Now, see, I bolded SB 1383 requires yada, 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 and then wrote after it in red, yikes. Because in practice, this is turning out to be remarkably hard. So let's take these one at a time. We'll return to that in a moment. The Triton leaks protocols thing. Climate Action California has our small methane team led by my co-chair, Will Brieger, who's a retired lawyer for California Air Resources Board. He knows them, he knows how they work. And we got 2 meetings over the last 7 months or so, which were essentially saying, can you do these logical updates? This is not a revolutionary thing, but it's an evolutionary thing. And it's time for an update to the 2010. Shortly after our second one, they had CARB launched a public workshop, which formally is the first step for what will be probably about a 2-year process of doing exactly that. So if you go online in the links off to the right, you'll see I've left you all sorts of Easter eggs here. You can take a look at like comment letters in response to it. You can see the slide deck from the workshop and so forth. So some of these, like this particular comment letter, for example, I usually won't spend much time over here on the green or blue stuff, but just to point you to stuff like this. This is one from the Californians Against Waste, and then some other people, Rocky Mountain Institute and whatnot. Really good comments to the workshopping. So I'm not super worried that we're going to bring ourselves out of the 2010s into the 2023s on this topic. But I think we have a much more difficult problem in getting big win 2, which is successfully implement the landmark Senate Bill 1383. It requires all 450 cities in California to do a good job. Historically, they've all had slightly different communication systems for talking to the customers, slightly different curbside pickup systems, slightly different contracts and relationships with the private vendors and so forth. So but that's just the beginning. This is really a difficult thing. But essentially, it follows what I would call the time-honored hierarchy that was developed in the 1970s. And this is from Clean Air Task Force, who's a very good group on methane. You should follow them. I've got a link in there as part of your link library. Historically, you see waste management hierarchy on the left. It was always like the last thing after you harvest out or pluck out every good other use for it, only what's left over you throw in the landfill. That's not a new idea. But we would always, initially try to simply prevent waste from happening in the first place, reuse it, if possible, recycle it, if necessary, into a new raw material, conversion or compost, and so forth. The same mentality exists today, but it's just been clarified by the fact that the modern scientific landfill sorting stations, like the Sunnyvale Sound Smart Center, they're functioning well. So as we chip away at the remaining portion of opportunities, we see the same logic, but it's just got different names. First, we need to get in and have food waste prevention, because about 40% of America's food is wasted, all those resources for transportation and water and so forth. And a lot of that winds up in landfill. 55% of California's landfill inputs are food waste, which is ought to blow everybody's minds. And then, so first of all, do something by way of preventing that, and then do some more with organic waste diversion, which is the 2 arms to those percentages that I read you from SB 1383. And then down at the bottom, do the kind of dump site rehabilitation and scientific landfill design upgrades that you'd have to do. For example, upgrading the 2010 regulations. So philosophically, nothing's changed, but the practical reality of trying to make this happen is just ridiculous. You're going to have, I'm over here on the right side. Curbside collection has to be nearly universal. It hasn't been. A 3-bin system has to be nearly universal. It will be. That way you can have most of the work done by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of homeowners and renters at home and not at the facility. So it's pre-sorted, which is vital. But we still have to cope with the coming tsunami that we're going to have to scale up at least 100 industrial scale composting facilities, run as much a quarter of the coming organics tsunami of 8 million tons through existing excess capacity at municipal wastewater digesters, which is kind of a cool thing, because you'll still get sewage sludge, which is a beneficial soil amendment. California gives 60% of its sewage sludge to farmers. And if we can ever figure out how to get the PFAS out of that stuff, we will be really doing a great thing. And I think we're going to succeed at PFAS because there are at least 7 bills on it this year in Sacramento. Cities are mandated to use tree chipper waste locally for mulch instead of landfilling. A lot of this kind of stuff. So that's fine, but it's still hard as hell. And so that brings me to line 24 here. For example, Los Angeles funded $1.67 billion for a 3-bin curbside pickup system. This was one of the reasons there's a lot of discontent with this among the cities and counties, because this was an unfunded mandate. There was some cap and trade money going to creating industrial infrastructure like those 100 composting facilities and so forth, and retrofitting the tooling on those municipal wastewater digesters. But the curbside pickup stuff, the staffing, that's all on the cities and the counties. And so they all just look at it as something they have already learned to hate. It costs them money that they didn't have to spend before. They have to go to 3-bin systems. They have to do stuff by way of headcount, because you can never really trust the green stuff, the green waste container. Somebody has to stand there watching it go by on a conveyor and pluck out bad stuff. So this is a thing. It's not a very easy transformation. And I want to point out a little bit about the sort of the politics of it here. I've got to row 25 here. Remember, every year about 30 new legislators graduate up from city or county office to the legislature, and they don't like SB 1383. In each of the last 4 years, there have been bills to try to take down SB 1383 and very likely chip away at it. Like, for example, this year, there are 2 bills that are passing quite easily to give exemptions to rural counties below a certain tonnage annually, and also give an exemption to counties that live along the border to the states, Nevada, Arizona, or Oregon. They can use out-of-state processors and for their composting and stuff for 15 years as a dispensation. Last year, Rivas, the new speaker, put through a bill that essentially slipped the due date from 2025 to 2026. So, okay, there was a bombshell. It didn't come out of nowhere, but on May 23rd, the Little Hoover Commission, which may be a new term for most of you, released its report. It had 4 major hearings last year. I think they're sincere, they're thoughtful. It's a commission of retired judges, current and retired legislators. Gil Garcetti, the former LA mayor, is on it. And they were actually quite thoughtful and I believe sincere in spelling out 12 recommendations for remediating what was really, honestly, a poorly communicated rollout, an unfunded mandate, which irritated smaller cities and makes rural areas furious because they don't even have curbside pickup, nor will they ever. Plus, if you take it to the dump and try to compost it, the bears will eat it. There's a long list of yeah buts. And so they tried to, in their list of recommendations, which were published shortly after, and I urge you all to read it, it's linked, 12 major recommendations that I believe may form the basis for 2024 legislation. Some of it we will want to oppose. So, for example, recommendation 1 is simply pause SB 1383 until the state does a better job of getting its act together. Cal Recycle points out that roughly half the cities are pretty close to being done with their implementation. So this may be an idea that would have been fine 3 years ago, but it's not fine now. It makes us look like incompetent. It causes people, for example, private entities that went into contracts with cities that now will be frozen to never trust government to not breach an agreement. There's all sorts of yeah buts that if you go over here, you can see the responses, CalRecycle's responses in cell H25. They're outlined in pretty good detail. So there's a clash, but it's not necessarily a backlash. I think that over the next couple of years, it'll result in a complete implementation of SB 1383. But we're clearly in a period where there's going to be a lot of turmoil, and the devil's in the details. So as you look at the second recommendation, we may very well support it, which is, remember I said that they didn't do a good job at an education campaign? Well, how about fund it? Make sure it gets in the budget. So we may support recommendation 2 next year if it turns into a bill. It might just be a budget line item. We definitely need to consider our positions on recommendation 7 to permanently exclude rural counties with less than 200,000 tons. There's a bill this year to exclude rural counties with less than 5,000 tons per year. Well, how many counties are we talking about here, and how difficult really is it for them? They may have a valid case because people in the rural areas, they just take their stuff to the dump twice a month or something like that. It's just not the same as what we're trying to do with the major cities with these massive collection and sorting systems like the Sunnyvale Smart Center writ large in San Diego or Sacramento or Fresno. And then there's about another 8 where I think we're just going to watch the movie and see what happens. They tend to be recommendations to clarify and reform government relationships between many levels of government. Market creation, which is important because the tsunami's got to go somewhere. It's not strictly going to be a government thing. There is definitely market opportunity, even, for example, brokering food waste, that sort of thing. There's a section in there for local empowerment. So I put down here in red, as a practical matter, what we're going to likely to do is next year, the climate movement is probably going to fall in line behind the thought leaders. And I would include with them our colleagues at Californians Against Waste. They've been really responsible. They're ahead of what we've been able to do on everything. And they're very, very experienced. And plus they have the scars to prove it going back quite a ways.
Bill, you have probably just a couple minutes if we want to try to stay on track.
Good. Let me close it out then. That's the bulk of my presentation. I just wanted to point out that there is another bonus here. There's big wins 1 and big wins 2, like we've been talking about. But the biggest win of all is if we scale these concepts nationally or we scale them internationally. So just keep in the back of your minds, press for an EPA rulemaking on landfill methane, like on line 34. And there's some climate action now actions you can take for that tonight. And then press to get more food waste recovery and composting money into the Farm Bill. And there are climate action now actions you can take tonight. As a matter of fact, today starts 7 action of the day actions on the Farm Bill related to methane, written by my colleague from Elders Climate Action, Marianne Krasny, who's a PhD at Cornell University. She's written well over 100 very well written, very well sourced actions for climate action now. So just to close, I would repeat that landfills are a more effective arena for advocacy than most folks might think, because it offers not only scope, but also speed and the possibility of rare precision. So if anybody wants to step up their game by joining one of our 4 super pollutant advocacy campaign teams, they're coalition teams. Climate Action California is really not a functional silo. It's a collection of collections. So like, for example, the person leading the ag methane team is the chair of 350 Humboldt. I'm an Elders Climate Action Policy and Legislation person for the one of the co-chairs for landfill methane. My partner is the policy and legislation person for 350 Sacramento. So see this little link here? The easiest thing you can do, if you want to step up your game, and instead of if you're at the point where you want to go deeply into a certain topic, for example, earlier I mentioned Manuel Espinosa's on this call, you could check on here climate finance and you'd be on his team. This is Climate Action California's, we haven't launched the website yet, but essentially these are all the sector teams that are trying to be a collection of vertical organizations, verticals, if that makes any sense. So here's the one we've been talking about tonight. Here's the one David's about to talk about in a moment, energy policy, which is where methane from oil and gas lives. But consider it, in particular, consider taking a leadership role. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, David Bezanson, and then you guys figure out how you want to handle questions.
David, you're muted.
Okay, my screen indicates that I'm unmuted. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bill. That was very enlightening. And Bill has worked with climate reality and elders teams for years, and he's told me a lot about these teams and said they're a very sophisticated audience. So I geared the presentation accordingly. And I'm going to make it a little briefer than I planned. So we have plenty of time for Q&A, which is my favorite part. That's where everyone learns the most. So methane emissions in the fossil fuel sector, that's otherwise known as the oil and gas sector. And methane is a high percentage of natural gas, as you probably know. And here is the molecule, 4 hydrogen atoms and 1 carbon in the center.
Sorry, are we supposed to be seeing your screen, David? Because we're not.
Okay, let me
I
try
think you can
this.
just share your screen, David. I think that will work. There you go.
Now, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Super. Okay. So this gas is critical for maintaining homeostasis of our atmosphere. And it's been around ever since we've had biomass and biological life forms on the planet. And it just keeps recycling from the atmosphere into the earth and then down into the deep layers below the shale in the form of oil and gas deposits. And it eventually just keeps recycling and maintaining the kind of temperatures that are conducive to the proliferation of species and normal populations of wildlife on the planet. If we didn't have this methane, things would be a lot cooler, and a lot of the species that need a warmer climate would not be able to survive. But because of anthropogenic factors, which we're well aware of, we have too much of this methane around, and it's trapping too much heat. So that's creating a lot of problems because it has such a long duration in the atmosphere. About half of it is gone within 12 years, and within 20 years, pretty much 100% of it has dissipated. And we'll find out what happens to it after that time. As you know, things get transformed. They don't just disappear. One kind of energy gets transformed into another. One kind of matter gets transformed into another. And the same with methane. And that occurs through natural processes. So major sources include the wells, producing wells. Here you can see the towers, the gathering lines, which are like pipelines that feed into a central pipeline leading to the customers, the end users. Here you have compressors, which help to move the gas through the pipelines, processing plant, which may purify the gas as it goes through it, or add an additive like an odorant so that people can, in their buildings, can smell leaks of the methane.
Would it be possible to zoom up the graphic?
Yes, let me try that.
Sort of
Thank you.
unreadable for, at least for me.
Producing wells, gathering lines, compressor stations, transmission lines, they're moving it. Some of it goes to LNG or liquid natural gas or propane plants. Some of it is stored underground. Some of it goes to into the gate, which leads to cities for our use in buildings. and then residential and commercial customers. So you have all these variables. Each of these points are things that could be improved to reduce methane emissions. So you have a long list here, 4 times 4 is 16 action items. And a lot of these are being largely ignored, but fortunately, some of them are being dealt with in the regulations and legislation. So we just looked at the major sources from the natural gas industry, starting from the wells and then through the whole distribution and processing system. And the leak rates in this system of what are called fugitive emissions, accidentally escaped methane gases, are much higher than were thought 10 years ago, according to more recent research. It used to be thought more than 10 years ago that about 1.4% of methane in the extraction and distribution system leaked out into the atmosphere. Now, more recent research indicates that it is almost double that. And then for specific fields or specific facilities, the leak rate can be much higher than that. And the leak rate is especially high in offshore wells. So fortunately, along the California coast, we only have 11 of those, but that's 11 too many. And those are the ones that are most difficult to plug. They're far more difficult, far more expensive to detect and plug leaks than those on land. Here's one way to keep track of these. Bill mentioned drones. Here's what it kind of looks like, to me, like an insect, a flying insect. And these could be maybe 1 foot in diameter or 3 feet or 5 feet. There's different sizes, but they can quickly zip around and measure a lot of oil fields and specific points of leaks in the field. Now, as Bill mentioned, it stays in the atmosphere for up to 20 years. Most of it is gone within 12 years, and then it gradually dissipates after 20. So GWP over 20 years is 84, over 100 years, it's 28. Now, why is that deceiving or confusing? Let's look into this a little. The methane is not in the atmosphere after 20 years. So how can it exert a warming effect between year 20 and year 100? Let's look at that. There is an explanation. There's very, very little written about this. Before we take a look at the science on that, to deal with GWPs and to decide which global warming potential duration to use, it's important to consider regulation and inventory. For the inventories that CARB keeps, which totals up the amount of greenhouse gases that we're generating in the state on an annual basis, 100-year is fine. It makes things simpler to use 100-year global warming potential for all. But for regulation, it's very important to use a 20-year because it puts all of the GHG effect, the warming effect, and the costs into the first 20 years of your policy window or your policy plans. So unfortunately, most planning that's done at the federal and state level is still using 100-year GWPs for methane. So that's one reason why our regulations and legislation are so lame. So it's very important to have cost benefit analysis would include a 20-year GWP for methane. So what happens to this methane in the atmosphere? It breaks down into these other gases. Ozone, which is O3. We know that tropospheric only lasts days to week in the atmosphere. So that's really an ultra short global warming potential duration. But the tropospheric ozone causes the formation of a wide array of toxics. And it gives the smoky hue to the atmosphere, and it diminishes visibility, but it also creates health-wrecking toxins. Some of which have GHG effects, and some of which last longer in the atmosphere than the ozone does. In the stratosphere, this can last for decades. There, it helps to protect from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So we've made a lot of progress on the stratospheric front in normalizing ozone level by banning CFCs, but at the tropospheric level, it's just out of control. Our GHG gas emissions from anthropogenic sources are overwhelming the planet's ability to deal with them. So then we have this ozone smog toxin factor. The other breakdown factor is water vapor, whether that comes from evapotranspiration from the land or from waterways or from contrails, from jets. The water in the atmosphere only lasts for a few weeks, and then it precipitates out. The other toxin is carbon monoxide. It lasts for about 2 months in the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide, we know, lasts for centuries. So in order to figure out the effect of methane, you'd have to figure out the GWP of each of these. So let's take a look at that. And we have a few additions to the list. When methane is not released raw, but it's burned, it's incinerated in some form, like flaring from a well. Or if you burn the gas to create electric energy, you get all this other junk, all these toxins. Nitrous oxides can have a GWP up to 280, volatile organic compounds called most often bicarb ROG, reactive oxygen gases, up to 14,000. Carbon monoxide increases the life of methane in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is 1, we know. Methane 84 using the 20-year. And particulate matter, we have brown carbon and black carbon, 1,000, 4,400. So as you can see, it would be very complex to try to determine the total warming effect from methane, especially if it's from combustion of methane. So we'll get back to that problem later. These are just some examples of flaring from wells. The gas comes out, excess gas that they don't want to bother trying to collect in the gathering lines and distribution lines, so they just fire it up and they burn it off. They're throwing away good product, which they could be profiting from. So many of the operators of wells are starting to wise up to that, and they're taking initiative on their own to diminish leaks, and they're pocketing the profit by having more methane to sell. Here's another example of flaring from oil. Okay, this shows oil deposits. One is below shale, one is above the shale level, and gas can be harvested from either one. And either one can involve flaring or venting from the crown of the wells. Bill talked about super emitters. These are the sources that emit the most volume of methane or other kinds of gases. And by the way, raw methane that's just being emitted from the earth is typically accompanied by a wide array of toxics. And many of these toxics have GHG properties. That's a long subject. That area needs a lot of research. So the policy options we have for influencing this mess are to take a look at what Bureau of Land Management is up to. This year, they've been working on new regulations which may phase out oil and gas extraction on public lands. As you may know, since 2020, the extraction of coal from public lands has been prohibited. It hasn't been prohibited permanently, so it's still a struggle to deal with it. But the BLM is dealing with the oil and gas extraction prohibition. EPA, there are numerous provisions in the Inflation Act regarding methane, and the EPA is trying to come up with some bright ideas of a fine schedule and setting limits on the amount of methane that can be emitted from wells and pipelines, compressors, tanks, etc. At the California level, the Methane Task Force was just formed last year. The most active participants that are the familiar agencies are CalGEM, Geologic Energy Management, and CARB, Air Resources Board. They're all kind of under the general umbrella of natural resources. And they offer workshops and webinars periodically, and they invite public comments. So that would be a good place for you to give them some bright ideas for regulations. Global Methane Pledge was created at COP last year, commitment of parties to try to implement the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord. And there is a widespread input from dozens of nations who have said, yes, we commit to decreasing our methane emissions, but it's just like CO2 emissions. For years now, many nations have said, yes, we're going to diminish our total carbon dioxide emissions output, but most of them have not made any significant headway. And then the other agency, which I just found out about recently, is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They're taking a look at both toxic and GHG effects of fugitive emissions from wells and pipelines and distribution systems. So this is a federal agency, and that's all they deal with. And they're focused entirely on the oil and gas. So you can.
Dave, you've got a couple more minutes if we want to stay on track for the Q&A. I'll let you decide that.
And if you want to get involved in some state legislation, these would be good choices. They passed the first house, so they're just waiting for you to give them a little help, and then resources below. So let's wrap it up and move on to the Q&A.
Great, thanks. This is a ton of information, all really good. I guess what I'll do is, if you want to raise hands, and I'll go back and forth between the raise hands, and I'll try to find the questions in order that are in the chat as well. But Glenn, do you want to get started with the question? Oh, you're mute. You're still muted.
Sorry, I understand the short half-life of methane and their secondary products. Is there a significant increase in a 10-year global warming potential for methane than the 20-year, or it's similar?
I have not seen any research or agencies that's used a 10-year duration to evaluate the warming potential of methane or any other gas for that matter.
Okay. Second question, if I can throw in another one. Is there an issue with anaerobic composting for people composting at home? Is that considered a?
I
It
can,
could be.
I can
I
answer
think Bill is
that.
the expert on this one. Do you want to handle that first before I make a lot of errors?
So if you don't turn your compost pile,
Right,
or you don't have one of those tumbling composters that you just turn every time you go out in the backyard or with a cup of coffee in the morning, every 3 days, they say, but it could be every day if you want. Methane will accumulate in your compost pile, which is like the old-fashioned landfills I described at the outset. However, if you keep turning it, which is what the commercial composters are supposed to be doing at industrial scale, they have long rows. It's called open wind row.
right.
And they have bulldozers to keep turning it. The turning allows that decomposition to occur aerobically in the presence of oxygen. And so you will still get carbon dioxide from the decomposition, but you won't get methane, which is more powerful. And so that's one of the virtues. But from a home point of view, it depends on how, do you turn your compost pile or not?
So I switched to a tumbler just for this reason, but I'm thinking most people probably don't have tumblers. Most people probably just have piles, and they're probably not turning them
Yeah.
religiously.
Well, in that
I
case,
have
just
a-
throw it in the green dumpster, because the city with that open windrow composting at industrial scale will do the right thing.
Mhm. So
Yeah,
a
but
question
not
from
just-
Adam is, let's go local. Adam asked, what do you think of San Jose doing this by sorting it out of our main trash bins? That's what we understand in San Jose is happening with our food waste.
So are you talking about food waste, Adam?
Yeah, they tell us to just keep putting our food waste in the trash, and they're gonna pull it out and do something with it.
I don't think they're lying. I think they have a staff of 70 people who stand there looking at an assembly line, because this is what I saw at the Sunnyvale Smart Center, and they just grab stuff that doesn't belong in that waste stream and throw it into the right waste stream. It's primitive, but they may very well know why they are saying that to you. I don't distrust San Jose on this at all. I think they probably know what they're talking about. It's easier if you do it assuming you get customer compliance at the homeowner level, but then the homeowner has to know, for example, don't throw meat in the composter, because that's kind of gross. And like, for example, bears will come dig up the compost. Does that answer your question?
Fair enough. I was just curious if you had any thoughts on it, because it's very mysterious to us on how this is working.
Exactly, right.
Well, maybe we should organize a plant tour, because I think that that would be probably really enlightening, and they're often proud to show us what they're doing.
I like that idea. That's cool. Does there any hands up, any other questions with hands up, or let's see here. Let me continue on then. Anthony or Tony asked us sort of the same question. Doesn't San Jose already have a 3-bin system? We have trash, recycles, and yard waste, but I think then Adam responded to that and explained that it doesn't go in the trash, in the yard waste. It has to go in our trash bin, the food waste. So I have a question. Is there a concerted effort, Bill, to educate all, you mentioned that the new legislators quite often really aren't supporting 1383. Is there a concerted effort to educate the new legislators? I think you mentioned later on, after I asked this question, that there is something afoot about education, but could you talk a little bit more about how and when and they're going to try to educate around landfill issues?
So Cal Recycle has to promulgate consistent uniform regulations, and they've gone as far as they think that they can go, but there is still some wiggle room within different cities to approach things quite a little bit differently, in part because many of them have already bought their bin systems, their color coding, for example. My green bin is brown, stuff like that. It's not labeled with, it still says yard trimmings. It doesn't say food soiled paper, food soiled cardboard, food waste yet. So I think they tried to codify it to a standard. So once you have a standard, then you can teach the standard. And that's what that bullet point 2 in the Little Hoover Commission recommendations is fund a budget that actually educates, soup to nuts, cradle to grave. And I would imagine that's the legislators too. Also, when it goes through committee, assuming that it's a bill, the committees and the argumentation from both sides is supposed to cover that kind of stuff and educate in that forum, including the bill analysis, the briefing papers and stuff like that. I don't think that, I think what we did was we set a really ambitious target without a great plan to implement it. So part of this is backfilling rationality.
Thank you. Bill, you have I guess that's a comment about emailing the link. Let's keep going here.
I had a question for David.
Yes, please.
David, can you explain what does SB 781 do? And has it been amended to such weakness that we don't support it anymore, or is it still a good bill?
Boy, you give me a lot of credit for having sound memory. I would like to read over summary of the bill while another question is being answered, and then I'll get back to the rest of you in a couple of minutes. So we're still endorsing the bill. We still think it's worth supporting.
What does it do for the people on the call?
Low leak methane.
What? I'm sorry.
Low leak methane.
So is this a certification program so that you can only sell methane in our state if it's certifiable that it came through pipes that were had a protocol for leak remediation? In other words, it's like a low carbon fuel standard, but it's a low leak natural gas standard.
Right. So that applies both to in-state production as well as imports.
What's the bill number on that one? Ouch.
SB 781.
Oh, that's 781. Okay.
Yeah, I know the
Yeah,
folks at RMI are very big on this idea of certifying sort of low leakage natural gas and trying to push it to get better prices and that sort of thing. I'm curious, what do you guys think of that idea?
I defer to the energy sector expert.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be very difficult to establish a baseline. You know, you have to first measure the fugitive emissions rate of each producer. And you need to know what quantity it is currently before they exert any efforts to start plugging things up. And then you need to monitor changes in their plugging of leaks and upgrading their equipment so it doesn't leak so much. And keeping track of the fugitive emissions rate of each operator is going to be very tricky, especially for out-of-state operators. They're going to push back on this, and they're going to say, well, you Californians can't tell us what to do. You know, we're free to sell our product anywhere.
No, I think the incentive is they expect prices to be higher for certified.
Definitely.
This is not a stick. This is a carrot, right?
Yeah. Yes, but it's both a carrot and a stick, because it would be a stick in the sense that those who have high emissions rate are going to have difficulty selling to green states like California, who are particular about that sort of thing.
Bill, you had a question for yourself in the chat.
Isn't that great? I realize that there is one fundamental piece of legislation before the 2023 legislature about food waste. And I just want to bring it to everybody's attention. Please support it. AB 660. Remember how we used to run 440s or 660s or whatever, a whole mile? So 660 is a third of a mile. So 660. And what it does is it reforms food waste. It reduces food waste by reforming used by and best by labeling, including making it mandatory. So currently what's there is a hodgepodge. It's voluntary. It confuses people. And studies have shown that we throw away more food at the family, grocery store, and restaurant levels than we need to, because standardization is always the friend. If you want to do a high quality job, standardize a business process, for example. So that's what this does. It standardizes the labeling. Its next hearing is before the Agricultural Committee in the second house. It passed the first house easily, but party line votes being what they are, it will be, in my opinion, it will be fraught in the second house, because you don't really know with agriculture whether there will be defections. So if this can be painted, for example, as some sort of silly job killer or whatever, the agriculture industry wants it to be amended so that these are voluntary rather than mandated, which is kind of silly. So what kind of a standard is that? So anyway, so please support AB 660. It's the only piece of legislation that I know of that addresses this landfill methane issue.
Glenn, you have a question.
Yeah. Just a question on the 25-30% of warming is attributed to methane. Is that number inclusive of the carbon dioxide from combustion, or is that exclude that and only looking at the fugitive emissions and secondary product part?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that pertains only to the raw methane that's getting in the atmosphere, and not the lower amounts of methane from combustion.
I didn't mean, yeah, but does it include the carbon dioxide from the combustion? Or
I don't think so. No, the carbon dioxide, regardless of the source, whether it's X or Y industry, that gets included as a carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Input, and that the total of all sources of that gives us our carbon dioxide number.
Okay.
For the year in the inventory.
Let's go to real quickly to Adam. Adam has a question, if that's still relevant, Adam, that's in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to just ask my question from the chat. This one's for David. At the leakage rates you mentioned, I'm pretty sure that means our gas-powered turbines are about the same or worse than burning coal.
There you go. Now, that is a dynamite point to make anyone, to anyone, when you're introducing the topic to them. If they say, "Oh, natural gas is clean and green," coal is dirty, but natural gas, no problem. We need that as a bridge fuel to use for a few more decades, at which point we'll probably have enough renewable energy. But actually, if you look at the fugitive emissions rate and you add it to the emissions from the combustion of methane in your turbines at power plants, the combination has about the same GHG impact as burning coal to create electricity. And they both generate high amounts of toxins.
Adam, does that answer your question? Shall we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm it and share that with everybody else.
So, Bob, you had a question too.
Yeah, hi, thanks. And I joined late, so sorry about that. But I wonder if you guys have a top 10 list of who the worst offenders in this space are. Is that easy to find somewhere, or did you talk about it?
In the oil and gas space, or in the landfill space?
But in the methane issue.
Overall. Well, if you go to the California Methane Survey, you can find a document or an engine, primitive web-based engine called the Methane Source Tracker, and you can vary a lot of filters and find all the data, and then download it, and then use a pivot table on your own if you're like me, crazy and foolish, And you can see the answer to your question. And you can also see what the minute ones were. Or you could wait for the satellite to go up and start looking at their outward facing websites, which should give you the same sort of thing. But I very strongly suspect that that very question has been asked and answered a bunch of times already. I just don't know how to lay my hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about the CARB site? I looked that up as you were.
Yeah, it's on the CARB site. It's part of the Colorado Methane Survey.
All right.
But there's probably some, like for example, some enterprising environmental journalists who's already recapped it.
Yeah.
Because a report on a report is often what environmental journalists will do.
Sure. I'm sure it is somewhere out there. So.
Share it with us, like for example, on the closed Facebook group, something like that, or maybe make a presentation on it because it's a really cool idea that we should probably tattoo on our arms.
Well, that sort of relates to a very similar question I had, which I think you answered, Bill, in terms of, measuring. I think, David, you mentioned that the abandoned wells haven't been measured. So will that be resolved when we have this, the satellite tracking that's coming up fairly soon? Will it track all the emissions from all the abandoned wells in California or in the country, especially California for now, since we're talking California?
I'll just give a brief answer to that first. Bill probably has some other insider information. CARB plans to acquire more drones and satellites to monitor, and at some point, it's likely they'll have enough monitors, either satellite, drone, or sniffer-based, to take a look at offshore, onshore, active, minimally active, and abandoned wells, and monitor everything. It won't take them long. They don't need to scan it 500 times to figure out which are the super emitters. So after they take a few passes over the whole state and take a look at all those sources, they'll find the super emitters, and then they'll focus their regulatory efforts on plugging those. And of course, a lot of money, tens of billions of dollars, are coming into states to monitor methane emissions from wells and to plug them. So California will be getting some of that
money too. So is there to sort of follow through on that, once they have especially the super emitters, and I'm really concerned about the abandoned wells, is there current legislation or upcoming legislation to fund that? I presume if they're abandoned, is there a way to go after the oil companies that abandoned them, or is the public going to have to fund fixing those abandoned wells?
Yeah, excellent question. Legislators have thankfully been dealing with this issue of public liability for private company emissions for years, and they've been trying to pass more stringent regulations about indemnity bond requirements that owners need to maintain in order to fund potential future liabilities, including capping and remediation of their wells. But they started from a very deficient level, say like 5 years ago, where the amounts of indemnity bonds that were required were so low, they just were covering a small fraction of the average cost to plug and remediate. Now they're up to maybe 20%, 30% of what the actual cost is. They're crawling in the right direction, but the fossil fuel lobbyists just have too much influence in the state to allow more effective legislation to pass. But we're headed in the right direction, and there are several bills on that topic this year. One bill focuses on fines if a owner operator has a well and it's detected that there's significant emissions. from that well, then they're going to get fined. You know, if the volume is above a certain level per day, certain number of tons per day. And then there's another bill which sets unique indemnity bond requirements for each well. CalGEM would be required to go out under law AB 1167, which just passed the assembly, and that would require an assessment on the part of the government agency of what it's going to cost to cap and remediate each well, so it'll be unique. And as you probably know, the offshore wells are very expensive to remediate and cap. There was a leak in one off the coast of Santa Barbara about 40 years ago, and the cost of plugging that was over $150 million.
Wow.
40 years ago, yikes.
Yeah, inflate that. You know.
What was the name? What's the number of the first bill that you referenced, David?
All the bills that I've referenced are at the end here, and 1167 is the assembly bill that is making good headway. This requires unique assessment of what the plugging costs are for each well, and that's going to be done by CalGEM. It won't rely on the word or opinion of the owner operator. And 781 is a low leak method. SGR2 is the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. That's a very general statement that says we've had enough. We're ready to phase out fossil fuels in California.
Got a quick question from Bob, and I think this is for you, Bill. I want to keep going because I don't want to miss people's questions here. He says Santa Clara is about to construct a major development on a landfill covered by a golf course across the street from the 49ers Stadium. What are the health impacts for people who will work and live over this former landfill?
Bob, can you tell me, is that the Santa Clara Municipal Golf Course? Is that Santa Clara Muni?
Yes, it is.
Hi,
So they're going to develop Santa Clara Muni.
yeah, this is right next to the convention center.
I know, I played at that course a bunch of times.
Right.
So it's
and-
going to be houses, huh?
Well, it used to be a landfill, then they built a golf course on top of it. Now it's going to become the new downtown for Santa Clara. And they're going to have offices, a hotel, residential high rises all over the place, and some open space and parks. But I'm sure that they had to do some kind of analysis of the methane coming out of that golf course or landfill. And they're about to start construction of this. So it's really a concern.
Well, it may or it may not be. We need more information. For example, what was the year the landfill closed? And does it have, and has it long had since closure, a robust system of piping and positive airflow inside with blowers that then take, because you're going to have continued methane production as well as other kinds of toxics, because the rest of the toxics are just a nastier soup than even methane. But at least let's talk about the gas. You continue to harvest it for 4 or 5 decades. Palo Alto's doing this. Sunnyvale, the Great Garbage Mountain next to the Sunnyvale Smart Center. Shoreline has 2 great garbage hills at both ends. They all have piping systems. They all have little blowers. They have houses. If you walk your dog, you listen, you see it. Well, that thing closed in 1991, but it's still working. They're still pumping out methane. So at least that part of it is, if they build in that area, 2 things. One is they may have finally got to the end of the curve where the organic material from the 70s is finally producing less methane as a diminishing return. 2, do they still have an infrastructure in place to safely make sure that the stuff is A, contained, and B, evacuated, because it's like a balloon that keeps trying to reinflate itself. But then I would also ask questions of the geologists and stuff. Just go to the meetings and bird dog it and ask them, show me where, Mr. Geologist, where this is a safe thing to do. Because it may very well be that after enough time passes, some of the hazards disappear. but the acids that are inside of a landfill will eat your face if you happen to be standing next to one of them that just like burps or sprays, steam or something, right? So that is a whole different animal than the stuff that we're talking about with methane. So this is a big question, but the only thing I can really suggest for Santa Clara is somebody like you, get in there and bird dog it, and as much as possible, see if you can find data, because they're going to have to do a pretty serious environmental impact report, like with teeth, to do something like build a city on top of a landfill. However, if you wait 200 years, it's probably fine. I don't know.
So I don't think, but let me just, I noticed a point here. Bob Brightburn, did you have another question, or did we get your question answered, even though your hand is down?
Oh, well, my hand shows that it is down on my screen. So it's up. If it's up,
No, you're good then. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have another question and that you just got tired of keeping your hand up, but I think you're good. You're good. So I guess I'm going to go over to Glenn.
Yeah, just jumping a little bit afield here, but do you guys have any speculation on what the emissions are or might be in the near future from the permafrost melting? Maybe like on a percent basis, or
I don't follow it.
okay.
Wow. Well, thank you guys. I think we probably need to shift over real quickly to a couple of little things for the chapter, but hope everybody stays with us for a minute. But thank you to Bill and David so very much. I mean, just a wealth of information, and I appreciate what you're doing, the knowledge that you're gaining, and that you're sharing that with us. Thanks for taking the time to organize that for us today. Really, really appreciate it.
Good meeting all of you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I guess let me just move over to the chapter leaders real quickly, and I'd love to just start with legend policy. If you guys want to share give a quick update on what's up with our chapter's legend policy team.
I'm sure. Why don't I go ahead and start, and Glenn, please feel free to jump in if you like. You've heard these guys talking about a bunch of bills, right? And talking about, well, what's going on with this one and that one. We're not at the scale of the Climate Action California folks who do this at very large scale, but our team, we're following a good 12 or 13 bills, 2 of which were on Dave's list there. The 1167 one with the bonding requirements for oil wells, so they can't abandon them, and the one about penalties for people who just do bad things in the oil and gas space. And so this is the kind of stuff we work on. We pick the bills that we think kind of are the ones that speak to us and that we think are important and that we want to get behind, and then we try to advocate for them in Sacramento. So we're still learning how to do this. If you're interested and you're a beginner, like, that's okay. I knew almost nothing about this like 4 months ago. Now I'm like sending letters to legislators and calling their offices. So like, it's very much a learn by doing effort. And hopefully, we can do our little part to make a big difference by pulling the state government levers that really affect things here. Glenn, is there anything else you want to add?
I would just add, I think Adam's really put a lot of energy into this, and it's built up a pretty aggressive effort so far, and I think we're looking forward to sort of a more impact as a result of this. Yeah, I think we've got support letters in the past several weeks for maybe 7, 6, 7, 8 bills. Is that right?
Maybe more than that even.
Maybe more. Yeah. Yeah.
And the last thing is, we do have a little team. There's me and Karen and Glenn, but there's also Elaine and Ken, who have just kind of jumped in and are helping on things. Ken's done this before, but if you're interested, come play with us. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have Deb. Do you want to share a little bit about communications?
Sure. I've been very active in the last few weeks with really trying to be more active on our social media, and we're really growing our Instagram following. And all I can say is I've given you all those links in the chat. If you can check out our social media and share it with your family and friends, and you take our messaging and put it on your platforms. It's a great way to get the messaging out there. I'm still looking for Paula Rochelle. She got off a little bit earlier, but she's going to be jumping in to help with communications around food, all the food issues around people's carbon footprints. So that's exciting. I'm still looking for anybody that might have public relations background that would want to work with me to develop some media lists and help us get the message out to the larger community and into the local communities and their local papers. That could be very powerful. So anybody that would like to jump on the communications bandwagon, I can find something for you to do. and as Paula knows, I will try to keep it simple as well. So she and I are exploring the great world of AI for generating content. We were both blown away. So stay tuned. She's got some interesting things that will be coming out in the newsletters. So.
Right. Thank you. Thanks. We also have a Silicon Valley Families team, and Sean was here. I think he had to leave early. And they're doing a lot. They're developing sort of a campaign push to get into the some of the schools, especially in East San Jose. But for those of you who are not in San Jose and you want to work on, helping teach children about climate change, let us know, and let me know, and we'll get you in touch with Sean. And we also have a decarb action campaign that Debbie Mytels is leading. And again, that's also a new strategy, working on trying to work on electrification issues around heat pump adoption in San Jose. So again, if you're interested in electrification and getting consumers to move from gas to heat pumps, we know there's way too much gas usage in California. Also let us know about that. We'd love to have you support us in that area. And then right now I'm working on member engagement. And so if any of you are really love to, talk with people, engage with people, help them get excited about moving forward in being active in climate, then that I would be the person you want to talk to, because I would love to have more people helping, dialing people and talking with people to see the value of working with us and doing anything from a small one time only task to like tabling to something more ongoing leadership. So I'd love to sort of increase the member engagement team as well. And so that really, I think literally we were 1 minute off from our time gone. Does anyone else have a comment that you'd like to make? Sure, Deb.
I won't make it long, but also stay tuned, because Bob Brightburn is we're working on another blog. And so in another 2-3 weeks, we'll have another exciting blog coming into your inbox. So I wanted to give Bob a shout out, because he works so hard on this stuff. So.
And what is the topic on that one?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, go ahead, Bob.
Oh, hey, hi, thank you. And it is about, it's kind of a follow-on, maybe a chapter 4, right, to the 3 article series that I wrote for the blog already on financial leverage and how to further utilize financial leverage to get corporations to behave more in alignment with our values, and a shift from a divestment and ESG model to an investment and engagement and get our voices into the boardroom kind of approach. And this will be a very specific kind of how-to and why this is a little bit more on why it's important, and some organizations that people can directly connect to for $10, get their voice into corporate boardrooms. So that's that's the main gist of it.
Sounds good. Great.
Great. Well,
Thanks.
thank you. Oh, go ahead, Deb.
I said, thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm looking forward to, we've got a couple of other topics moving forward, maybe in the blogs as well, that we're going to be, maybe we've sort of talked about, see if that's going to be on the the back of Bob's mind to work on. So thank you all very, very much. And really appreciate it, you being here. It means a lot to me, to all of us, when you attend our meetings, and that just sort of helps me feel like, we're coalescing into a stronger team. So thanks for taking the time out of your evening to be with us so very, very much. And and watch for our next meeting and other alerts that are coming along as we follow legislation, find great topics to talk about, and get our strategy moving in all of our different chapter leader campaigns. So thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care.
Thank
See
you.
all. Thank you.
Bye.